After the CEO of her shower loses control during a tumultuous night, she is too tempting. Passion greetings, YouTube family. I sincerely hope this moment can bring you peace. Heart love to your soul and joy to your life. May every word spoken here fill you with warmth, every story shared. Bring light to your spirit, and may we all be blessed with endless love, passion. And may you always find joy in the smallest of things and strength in the most profound of feelings. Amen. I am ecstatic to have you join me today on this journey of intense love, fiery passion, and unforgettable romance. Your presence means the world, and I cannot wait to dive into today's breathtaking story with you. Tell me, what was your favorite moment from today's story? Which scene touched your heart the most? Let's talk about it in the comments. I would love to know what moved you and where are you watching from? I love knowing that this beautiful community comes from all around the world, connected by our shared love of romance and telling stories. Leave your small town or even just a little hello in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. A special request from my heart to yours. If you find these stories amusing, if they make you happy, if they give you a little escape from reality, please subscribe to this channel and show how much you appreciate it. Everything it allows me to keep creating these deeply emotional romantic stories just for you. So hit that subscribe, press the notification bell to activate it, and let's continue this love journey together. Don't forget to like and comment and share this video because it helps more than you know. Let's start by going in depth into a world where love has no boundaries. Love stretched across the city skyline. Endlessly, its dazzling lights casting a golden glow over the dark expanse of towering buildings, each one standing as a testament to power and ambition. The air was thick with the hum of an empire that never slept, a city where fortunes were made and hearts were broken without a second thought. At the very top of one of the tallest buildings, where the view Daman Harav was surrounded by a man who exuded fear and awe. Everything is ruthless, untouchable, and potentially dangerous. Intoxicating his empire of Harabi Enterprises was a name whispered in boardrooms with reverence and fear, a man whose actions had the power to demolish businesses in a single breath, whose mere presence was enough to make seasoned businessmen fail. He had built his world on control and iron grip over everything and everyone around him. Control that was the essence of Daman, from the perfectly tailored black Armani suit that fit his chiseled frame like a second skin, to the way his stormy blue eyes held a depth of calculation that few dared to challenge. Women hurled themselves at him because he had an aura of dominance about everything about him. Aces, socialites, and models all yearned for his attention. However, a man who took what he wanted and tossed it left Damien cold and unmoved. When it stopped entertaining him, love became a weakness and passion was fleeting. Emotions that were nothing more than distractions that didn't belong in his world. But this evening, something was different from his day, which had been an incessant cycle of meetings, numbers, and cutting through incompetence with rage or sharp words that left no room for failure. His employees feared him, rivals admired him, and the public perceived him as an untouchable force. But as he leaned back in his Italian leather chair, the city lights reflecting of the smooth mahogany desk before him, his mind drifted not to business deals or mergers, but to someone he had never expected to consume his thoughts. Selena Carter, his personal assistant, the one woman in his entire empire who never faltered before him. Selena, in contrast to others who hid from his gaze or waited patiently for his approval, was unmoved. Her quiet defiance and sharp wit made her the most. She was unlike the other women who tried, an infuriatingly irresistible woman he had ever met. To seduce him at galas, draping themselves in designer gowns and expensive perfume, no, Selena was different. Perhaps it was the way she carried herself, poised, confident, yet with a hint of something deeper, perhaps something untamed. Or perhaps it was the way her hazel eyes met his, unwavering and full of challenges she didn't say, as if she didn't want to be another porn star in his game. She never asked for his attention, and that was what drove him mad. Damien was a man who was used to getting whatever he wanted, and right now he wanted her. At first he dismissed it as mild enthusiasm, because what could an arrogant CEO possibly see in his assistant beyond her efficiency? But as the days passed, as she continued to be The only woman who didn't crumble under his presence, something inside him shifted the thought of her, lingered longer than it should. The scent of her perfume when she walked past him stayed in his head long after she left the room. And then suddenly this evening, the city had been hit hard by a torrential downpour that drenched the streets like a storm. That made the world feel wild and electric. Selena had been caught in it, and for once her carefully composed exterior had faltered. He had seen her standing at the entrance of the office soaked, shivering, her blouse clinging to her delicate frame in a way that made something in his chest tighten. She had refused his offer at first to stay the night at his penthouse rather than risk the storm. However, Dahman was not the kind of person who would take no for an answer. Instead, he had, given that he was her boss, insisted not as a request but rather as an order. Standing at the bar now, his penthouse whiskey, which he has forgotten to hold, Dahman heard the sound that would change everything, the soft patter of bare feet on the marble floor. He turned, and the sight before him nearly stole his breath. Selena, as she emerges from the shower, her damp body covered only by a towel, skin glowing under the soft lights of his penthouse. Her long dark hair dripped with water, the strands clinging to her shoulders and collarbone, the scent of vanilla and honey filling the air like a drug. He didn't know he needed his control. His legendary, unbreakable control shattered in an instant. Time stopped, his blue eyes darkened. Locked, concentrating on the delicate way the towel embraced her curves, the minute drops of water that fell down her throat vanished. Into the fabric with Ed's fingers and the glass in his hand, clenching his jaw. So difficult that she was tempted itself. Selena took a small step forward, oblivious to the war raging inside him. Or maybe she wasn't. She murmured in a lower voice that she didn't mean to interfere. Dahman barely heard her words over the pounding of his pulse, and they vanished from his mind faster than he had ever heard them. Before he could stop them, she gave him a low, commanding look that was dangerously raw. Froze his slow, deliberate steps, his tall frame rising above her as he moved closer. He was no longer the arrogant CEO, closing the distance between them. The only woman who didn't crumble under his presence, something inside him shifted the thought of her, lingered longer than it should. The scent of her perfume when she walked past him stayed in his head long after she left the room. And then suddenly this evening, the city had been hit hard by a torrential downpour that drenched the streets like a storm. That made the world feel wild and electric. Selena had been caught in it, and for once her carefully composed exterior had faltered. He had seen her standing at the entrance of the office, soaked, shivering, her blouse clinging to her delicate frame in a way that made something in his chest tighten. She had refused his offer at first to stay the night at his penthouse rather than risk the storm. However, Dahman was not the kind of person who would take no for an answer. Instead, he had, given that he was her boss, insisted not as a request, but rather as an order. Standing at the bar now, his penthouse whiskey, which he has forgotten to hold, Dahman heard the sound that would change everything, the soft patter of bare feet on the marble floor. He turned, and the sight before him nearly stole his breath. Selena, as she emerges from the shower, her damp body covered only by a towel, skin glowing under the soft lights of his penthouse, her long dark hair dripped with water, the strands clinging to her shoulders and collarbone. The scent of vanilla and honey filling the air like a drug. He didn't know he needed his control. His legendary, unbreakable control shattered in an instant. Time stopped, his blue eyes darkened, locked, concentrating on the delicate way the towel embraced her curves. The minute drops of water that fell down her throat vanished. Into the fabric with Ed's fingers and the glass in his hand, clenching his jaw. So difficult that she was tempted itself. Selena took a small step forward, oblivious to the war raging inside him, or maybe she wasn't. She murmured in a lower voice that she didn't mean to interfere. Dahman barely heard her words over the pounding of his pulse, and they vanished from his mind faster than he had ever heard them. Before he could stop them, she gave him a low, commanding look that was dangerously raw. Froze his slow, deliberate steps, his tall frame rising above her as he moved closer. He was no longer the arrogant CEO, closing the distance between them. Control over everything. He was a man who was on the verge of madness's breath. Hitched as he reached out his fingertips, ghosting over her arm, tracing a single drop of water that slid down her skin. His touch was like burning fire, leaving behind a trail of possession in the air. Between was thickly charged with something unspoken and unavoidable that you do not have. Yeah, his rough voice was almost unrecognizable, and his eyes were burning into hers. The depth of his desire, undeniable what you've just done to me. Selena, the world blurred everything else, fading into irrelevance in this moment, in this space. Nothing else existed but her, and Damanharov knew he was completely. Damanharov's life was irreversibly destroyed because he had built it on an unshakable foundation of control and cold, calculated decisions that didn't allow for emotion. No space for hesitation. He was a man who dictated the rules of every game he played, who never allowed himself to be ruled by impulse. Yet as he stood there watching Selena Carter stand before him in the dim light of his penthouse, her skin covered by a damp towel glistening with the remnants of her shower, he felt something inside him unravel, something that had never come undone before the rational part of him. The part that had always dictated his every action screamed for him to step back, to look away, to remind himself that she was his employee, that she was off limits. But that voice was drowned out by the storm inside him, caused by the excruciatingly burning heat of CED. Standing there, she was too tempting and intoxicating to pass through his veins like fire. With her dark hair damp and clinging to her delicate shoulders, her hazel eyes wide and uncertain as they locked onto his, the towel she held around herself was dangerously loose, barely clinging to her frame, and Daman's eyes flickered to the delicate curve of her collarbone, to the water droplets that slid down her. As his throat vanished into the soft fabric, his hands were clenched at his sides. His muscles were twisted like those of a predator, and he was about to spit, deep breathing. And uneven as he fought against the overwhelming need threatening to consume him, whole, Selena took a step back, her bare feet barely making a sound against the cold marble floor. But Daman caught the way she swallowed, the way her fingers gripped the edge of the towel tighter, as if she too could feel the dangerous tension thickening the air. She was nervous and hesitant between them, but she wasn't afraid, which only made it worse because if she had looked at him with fear, if she had tried to run, if she had, he might have been able to muster the courage to leave. Instead, she just stood there, her breath coming from her chest in a soft, shallow way, rising and falling in a rhythm that matched his own, her lips parting ever so slightly as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. And Damien knew he was past the point at that point. Of no return, his feet moved before his mind could stop him, his body closing. He saw her gasp softly in the empty space between them, and moved quickly, seeing the way her eyes widened in anticipation. But she didn't move away. She didn't take the only permission he needed, was to tell him to stop, so his hand shot out. He wrapped his delicate hands around her wrist, and the moment he touched her, a violent touch burned in her damp skin. He felt such an intense shudder through his body that it nearly brought him to his knees. How could this be? One touch, one moment of skin against skin, set him ablaze like this his. He felt her tremble beneath as his slow, deliberate fingers trailed up her arm, leaving behind a fire trail. Her body swayed toward him as if it had been drawn there by an invisible force, and his touch felt the way her breath hitched. Neither of them could fight. His other hand came up his fingers, tilting her chin so that she had no choice but to Selena. Meet his gaze. His grumbling voice was low, whispered with a feeling that even he couldn't describe, and she shivered at the manner in which he said her name in response to his undeniable hunger, but she remained silent. She didn't stop him from tracing the soft, plump curve of her lower lip with reverence with his thumb. He had never touched a woman like this before, not with care or tenderness, bordering on worship. Her, he couldn't bring himself to be anything but gentle, even as every muscle in his body screamed for him to devour. Under his touch, she parted her lips completely, letting out a soft, unintentional sigh. Throat in Daman's last shred of restraint snapped with a deep guttural. He groaned as he raised her face and pressed his lips against hers. As soon as when their lips met, a fiery blaze broke out between them, erasing any last traces of resistance. She gasped against him, her fingers clutching at his shirt. Daman heaved a groan as he felt her body melt into his, yielding surrender while maintaining his quiet. Defiance that drove him wild, his hands slid down, tracing the curve of her waist, pulling her flush toward him. He felt her tremble as his fingers brushed the towel's edge, teasingly daring his. Selena responded with a desperation that matched his own when his lips moved hungrily against hers and demanded that they be eaten. She was sweet and soft, but underneath that sweetness was a fire that was just like his. Intensity and a fire he had never anticipated in her. He intensified the kiss by sweeping his tongue into her mouth and tasting her, claiming her. And she moaned against him, a sound so soft, so utterly intoxicating that it nearly drove him insane. "Daman," she gasped, her voice shaking, but she wasn't insane. Number pulling away, if anything, she was actually bringing him closer. And Damien? He was completely lost. His mouth trailed from her lips to her jawline. Then he kissed her lower down with a heated open mouth, tasting the water that was still on her. Skin found the towel's edge with his fingers, playing with it with his. He struggled against the unbearable urge to remove it and finally claim what was his. Selena moaned, his breath heavy, softly her head tilting back to give him more access, her fingers digging into his shoulders as if she was holding on for dear life. She was drowning in him, and he was drowning in her. "Tell me to stop." His voice was rough, ragged, but he was fighting a battle he was desperately losing. Selena's eyes fluttered open dark, and there was a hint of restraint in it. Dazed, her lips swelling from his kisses, her short, desperate breath. Gasps. She gave him a brief stare as though she were looking for something in his eyes. She then whispered something unspoken that neither of them could identify. "I don't want you to say the words that sealed their fate." "Stop," a growl rumbled deep in Damon's chest, and in that moment his last sliver of control fell into oblivion, with a rough, desperate groan as he pulled her close to him, slamming his lips into hers with a hunger that bordered on madness. His fingers tugged at the toe, and as the soft fabric slipped away, Damon knew this was only the beginning. Selena Carter had unraveled him, and there was no turning the moment the towel slipped from Selena's delicate frame. Time itself seemed to stop, the very air in the lavish penthouse thickening with a tension so unbearable it was suffocating. Damon Harov had always been a man of unshakable control, a ruthless force of nature who dictated every aspect of his life with a precision that left no room for chaos, no space for distractions. But as he stood there and gazed at the breathtaking vision in front of him, he observed every rule he had ever established, every ounce of control he had ever wielded, shattered into dust. Selena was exquisite, a vision of temptation, so pure, so utterly intoxicating, that he felt as, despite the fact that he had been punched in the gut, the dim penthouse's soft light, her bare skin was illuminated by lights, highlighting the curves that had been torturing his thoughts for far too long. The delicate dip of her waist, the gentle swell of her hips, the smooth, untouched beauty of a woman who had never before allowed herself to be claimed. His breath came hard and fast. His chest went up and down under the weight of his uncontrollable raw hunger. Selena's breath caught in her throat as she surged through him as Damon's eyes devoured her. Her look was so intense and possessive that it gave me a violent shiver. She ought to have felt exposed and vulnerable down her spine, but instead she felt wanted in a way she'd never had before. And Damon looked at her more than just with lust, with something deeper, darker, and more indicative of obsession, of necessity for a man nearing total surrender to the raging fire. He wanted to touch her between them, to mark her and make her his in every possible way, but he resisted by clenching his fingers into fists at his sides. His jaw clenched so hard it was painful. He wanted to take his time to savor every last bit of her, but his control was hanging by a thread that was coming apart. With his voice was nothing more than a "for Selena" every second that passed. Ragged whisper, his throat was dry, and his heart was beating like a worm as she swallowed. Her hazel eyes locked onto his, her breath coming in soft, shallow pants. Damon, and that was all it took. With a low, guttural growl, Damon surged forward. He finally let go of the restraint in his hands, gripping her waist and pulling her against him, with a force that left no trace. A wildfire erupted as soon as their skins collided, leaving no space between them. The ember that had been burning for far too long finally burst into an unstoppable. Selena gasped infernally as she instinctively reached for his shoulders with her hands. Her body pressed against his, her fingers digging into the shirt's fabric. Her naked skin's warmth was too much of an intoxicating sensation. Against his is making him shake violently, and he groaned as his grip tightened. Burying his face in the crook of her neck, his lips gracing the delicate skin, and his breath becoming hot and uneven. "Do you have any idea," he murmured, his voice low, dangerously rough, "what you do to me?" "Selena." Her breath hitched as he trailed heated kisses along her throat, his lips stricken against her. "Damien I skin," her words were cut off as his kiss on her was so passionate and desperate that it broke them apart once more. His lips moved against hers with undeniable hunger, devouring her both breathless. Demanding yet somehow still achingly reverent, as if he knew this moment would change everything, as if he understood that there would be no turning back after tonight. As she surrendered herself to the flames that matched his, Selena melted against him, wrapping her arms around his neck. Passion and desperateness that spoke of her own buried longing and desire. Had fought for far too long, Damien's hands had a possessive grip on her body, and he had reverence as he traced her spine's delicate curve and dip with his fingers, her lower back, as if committing her to memory, memorizing each and every sparks danced across her skin with each touch, setting her ablaze in a... She gasped in a way she had never imagined possible as his lips trailed lower. Kisses that blazed a path down her collarbone, his hands examining her with reverence that bordered on worship. He wanted to take his time to explore her, to drive her to the brink of madness, but his own body was burning with a need that could not be satisfied, and his control was fraying. Tamed, he pulled back for a brief moment, his breathing ragged, his blue eyes dark with an emotion so intense it sent shivers through her. "Tell me you're mine." Selena's heart sank as he murmured, his rough voice laced with unspoken desperation, pounded when she met his gaze and saw the unmistakable, raw obsession burning in his eyes that she had never seen before. Anyone's before never belonged to anyone, never allowed herself to be claimed. And yet, standing there in Damon's arms, her body trembling beneath his touch, she knew she already belonged to him. "I'm yours," she whispered. A deep primal growl escaped from Damon's throat, and at that exact instant, the last sliver of control he had left shattered into oblivion. Crashed once more into her arms, and he lifted her with his hands on her thighs. Selena gasped as he pinned her, effortlessly carrying her toward the bedroom, with a desperateness that bordered on madness. Her against the nearest surface, his body pressing against hers, and his heat surrounding her, consuming her. He kissed her harder and deeper, as if he was afraid to leave her lips. Let her go, as if he needed her more than his next breath, and then without another word, he carried her to the bed, lowering her onto the soft sheets with a gentle ESS that contradicted the wild hunger in his eyes. He hovered over her. His fingers, his intense gaze was fixed on hers as he traced her flushed cheek. Sent her heart racing, and he murmured, "There's no turning back after this, Selena. If I take you tonight," your voice is thick with unspoken emotion. Selena felt her heart stutter, as mine forever. Under him, her entire body was shaking, and his voice contained something raw and dangerous. Something that told her this was more than just passion, this was possession. She extended her hand and ran her fingers through his hair, bringing him closer to her. "Make me yours," she whispered. "Take me, Damien." And Damon growled deeply like a primal. Did exactly that night he didn't just claim her body, he claimed her soul. The night had been a storm of passion, fire, and complete surrender. And yet, even as dawn crept through the towering glass, through the windows of Damon Hargrove's penthouse, his hunger persisted. He had spent the night getting lost in her, insisting that she was his, but somehow he still desired more of her warmth, more of her touch, and more of the way she... He had always been a man of power, a man who dictated everything, and his feet shook beneath him. Aspect of his life with ruthless efficiency, despite the fact that he was completely consumed by a woman who had shattered every wall he had ever built. Selena was lying next to him, her body covered in the silky sheets that had. Her dark hair fell in waves over the pillow as she barely remained on the bed throughout the frantic excitement of the night. Her breath was smooth, and even as she stood there, her bare skin still red from his touch. Snooze Damien had never been one to linger over a woman after the night had ended, because he had never been one to admire them. In the afterglow of intimacy, but this was different his. In order to identify the traces he had left on her body, he used his fingers to touch her. Remind himself that she was real, and that the night's madness did not in any way fever dream, but even more than that, he wanted to wake her, to claim her all over again, to subdue her and lose himself in her until nothing else matters. Existed, the thought sent a powerful primal heat coursing through him. He was already reacting to the sight of her, wondering what the hell she had done to him. Had told himself that it was nothing more than physical desire, a need that had been left unchecked for far too long. But as he watched her, as he listened to the soft rhythm of her breathing, a dangerous realization settled over him. This was more than just want. This was obsession. A low growl rumbled deep in his throat as he reached out, unable to resist any longer. His fingers brushing against her shoulder's curve, tracing the trace of his lips on their wake. The moment his skin met hers, a shiver CED through her. Her body reacting to his touch even in sleep. The sight made his chest tighten, a fierce possessiveness surging through him. She was his. The thought sent a dark, euphoric contentment that swept through him, and a deep, unshakable desire to ensure she never forgot it, never doubted it never belonged to anyone else. Selena stirred beneath his touch, a soft, breathless sound escaping her lips as her body's shy rifted against the sheets. Slowly her lashes fluttered open, revealing the hazel eyes that had haunted his thoughts for far too long. For a moment she simply stared at him. Her expression was clouded with confusion, as if she were still lost in the dream. But then, as realization dawned, her lips parted, her breath hitching, and Damien knew she remembered the way his name had fallen from her lips the night before, the way he had worshipped her, the way he had ruined her for anyone else. And he watched as her neck began to blush. Watched something in her as she instinctively gripped the sheets with her fingers to protect herself from his intense gaze. Him snapped, he couldn't hold back any longer. With a low growl, Damien moved his body. His hands grabbed her wrists above her head and immediately hovered over hers, trapping her beneath him as his lips moved. Roasted over hers, making fun of her and pushing her to the point of madness. "You're awake," he murmured, his voice thick with desire, his breath fanning against her lips. Selena swallowed hard, her eyes widening, her pulse hammering beneath his grip. Damien, he smirked at the way his name trembled on her lips, the way her body arched instinctively against his, despite the faint hint of hesitation in her gaze. He could feel it. The battle raging within her, the part of her that still tried to resist, to convince herself that last night had been a mistake. But it was too late. She was his now, and Damon had never been a man who let go of what belonged to him. His grip tightened slightly, his fingers lacing through hers as he leaned in, his lips brushing against her jaw, trailing lower, pressing a heated kiss against the sensitive spot on her neck. She gasped, her body shuddering beneath him, her fingers trembling in his grasp. "Tell me, Selena," he murmured against her skin, his voice dangerously low. "Are you going to pretend you shouldn't be doing this?" she said, her lips parted as if she wanted to protest something, but not the words. Instead, a soft, desperate sound came out, escaped her, a sound that sent a wave of satisfaction surging through him, because he knew she couldn't fight it. She didn't. As he pulled back just enough, his lips curled into a dark, knowing grin. I aimed to meet her gaze with his piercing blue eyes that were fixed on hers. Thought that before she could say anything else, his lips once more snatched hers, asserting possessiveness, leaving no room for, there was no way out of their doubt, and the fire that burned between them rekindled a storm of fervor that neither of them could contain, and an unquenchable hunger satisfied. Damon immersed himself once more in her and made her his entire being. Once more it became abundantly clear that he would never let her go. The world outside had vanished into nothingness, replaced by the golden hues of dawn. Through Damon Hargrove's penthouse's glass walls, which cast a soft glow over the room that witnessed the night had been a storm of passion, but the air was still. The scent of desire lingering like an intoxicating spell, heavy with the remnants of their uncontrollable hunger. Even though the night was over, the fire between them refused to be put out, and neither of them could escape. Extinguished, Selin was still warm from his touch as she lay naked beneath the silk sheets. Touch her body, which was still shaking from the way he had repeatedly claimed her. As if he was attempting to imprint himself on her soul and was unable to forget her, that she was now his, and her lashes parted as she slowly opened her eyes. Fluttering against her flushed cheeks, she found herself staring directly into the piercing blue gaze of the man who had ruined her in every possible way. Damon was watching her, not just looking, watching. His body was still pressed. He held her tightly in his strong arms, as if he were worried that if he let go, she would vanish. Go! There was something perilous, a possessive quality in his gaze that, despite the warmth that was still present between them, it sent a chill down her spine. Was as if the man who had never been touched could not be read. Unshakable had unraveled completely, as if he had been stripped of the ironclad control that he once wore like armor was gone, leaving only his pure obsession with Selena swallowed, attempting to control her breathing and attempting to ignore the way his fingers sluggishly traced the curve of her waist, as if he had memorized every her murmured, "You're awake," her voice being softer than she had intended and laced with an unspoken tension. Neither of them could ignore Damien's lips curved into the faintest smirk. But there was no amusement in his eyes, only dark hunger that never goes away. "You didn't think I would go to sleep after what we did you?" His voice was deep. Selena's heart pounded her body, betraying her as heat, husky and still, thick with the remnants of the night's madness, crept up her neck as she remembered his hands, lips, and body like wildfire. She should have been, despite being worn out. She somehow felt more awake than ever, as though she had been set. She tried to move away from him, ablaze inside, to make even the tiniest gap between them. But as soon as she moved, his grip tightened. He wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her back against him, forcing her to gasp. He murmured, "Hitch, you're not going anywhere." His lips grazing the shell of her fingers, curled into the sheets, her ear sending a delicious shiver down her spine. Her hazel eyes met his as she slightly turned her head in search of something rational kept her from recalling the untouchable CEO she once knew. Known, but nothing remained, and Damien Harrow was completely undone, and she was the one who had done it. Selena took a deep breath in and spoke. "Damien, what are we doing for the first time?" Barely a whisper time since the night had begun. Something flickered in his eyes, something deeper. Then lust, something dangerous, something that sent her pulse into a frantic rhythm. She couldn't control. He shifted and rolled her over onto her back, securing her beneath him once more with his hands bracing the mattress. His body was encircling her on both sides of her head, making it impossible for her to escape. His jaw clenched, his entire body trembled with intensity, and his gaze burned into hers. That stole her breath. "What we're doing," he said slowly, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't quite place, "is something you can't run from anymore." Selena, her lips parted, a protest forming on the tip of her tongue. But he didn't. By allowing her to speak, she was denied the opportunity to deny what was going on between them. His hand slid beneath the sheets, his fingers tracing a slow, torturous path down her body. A silent reminder of the way he had unraveled her the night before, of the way he had claimed her so completely there was no part of her left untouched by him. She gasped her body. His lips hovered just above hers, her arching against him, her breath breaking. His dark eyes, fierce music, unrelenting. "You can try to fight it," he murmured, his breath mingling with hers, his lips barely brushing against her own. "But we both know you're mine now." Selena's heart slammed against ribs, her body betraying her as heat coiled low in her stomach, her heart racing from his dominance's sheer forced possession of his unwavering desire to repeatedly make her his. But because Damon wasn't just a man, she felt a tinge of uncertainty rise in her chest as desire threatened to consume her. Who wanted her, and she wasn't sure if he would ever let her go. She was prepared for what that actually meant. Her voice was slightly trembling as she pressed her hands against his chest, coming across more muted than she had intended. Dom, and I can't. His grip tightened, a dark shadow passing through his gaze. His expression, you can't read what she swallowed suddenly, forcing herself to breathe, and force herself to think of the right words to say. I can't be just. Another one of your victories. But he didn't move for a while. Didn't speak, and then his expression darkened, his entire body tensing. Something dangerously possessive flickering in his gaze. You think that's what this is? His voice was quieter now, but there was something lethal beneath the softness, something that sent a warning shiver. Selena bit her lip, her heart pounding, and she felt a chill down her spine. Is Damien, but I know what you are. You don't do relationships, you don't do. He abruptly cut her off, his voice sharp, and he tilted her with his fingers. Chin up until their eyes meet. Don't tell me what to do because you have no idea what you've done to me. Selena, her breath caught Damien. You think I can walk away from this? His voice was low, filled with something real or raw. You think I could play it up last night? Meant nothing, that I can let you go and go back to the way things were. She swallowed, her pulse unsteady. You're wrong, he whispered, his lips brushing against hers, his breath hot, his words sending shivers down her spine. Because I don't want anyone else. I don't want anything else. I want you. And that's all there is to it. She had left shattered because, in that moment, she knew she belonged to Dom and Harov, and he couldn't escape now. Their silence was deafening, but tension was in the air. Selena could still hear the crackle, which was perilous and impossible to ignore like a live wire. Feel the weight of Damon's words pressing against her chest, still hear the dark, husky promise in his voice, as she hadn't been prepared to accept that he didn't want her as a fanciful indulgence is more than just another conquered territory. Damon Harov terrified her because neither he nor he was a man known for restraint. The kind of man who gave without taking his love, if that's what this was, would destroy and consume her, leaving her with nothing but the ashes of her former self. She couldn't, despite every warning she heard inside her head. Move, she couldn't push him away, not when he was looking at her like this, not when his fingers were tracing slow, lazy circles against her bare hip. His touch, she set off something deep within her that she had no control over. Forced herself to take a big breath in order to look at him, Damien. Her voice faltered, betraying her hesitation. Her fear, his smirk was slow, knowing almost dangerously. You know how sweet his finger is. Slid higher, gracing her waistline, causing her breath to catch. Are you going to tell me that you don't want this? She asked. Hated how easily he read her, and how her body betrayed her with every shiver and heat pulse that spread out under his touch. I'm not sure what this is. She slowly exhaled and took her hand, admitting in a barely audible whisper, slipping beneath the sheets wrapping around her thigh in a way that made her breath catch. It's exactly what you think. He murmured, Selena, his voice thick with a sinister, possessive hunger that sent shivers racing down her spine. You and me, no more running, no more pretending. Her heart pounded violently, her mind screaming at her to stop this before it was too late, before she drowned in something from which she would never be able to escape. However, Damon's lips brushed against hers, soft at first, teasing, coaxing before deepening into something that shattered whatever resistance she had left. And just like that, she was his. Damon pulled her under his body as the sheets twisted once more, pressing into hers with an urgency that sent heat pooling low in her stomach. His kiss was insistent and desperate, as though he needed to demonstrate something, as if needed to remind her that no one would ever touch her like he did. And she gave him permission because, oh God, she wanted to. She also arched against him, her fingers burying themselves in his shoulders, body responding to him in ways that made her forget why had ever tried to fight this mind. He growled against her lips. His touch claimed her in a way that left no room for doubt, and she gasped as his hands gripped her hips. Damien groaned, his lips shattering as they traveled down her throat column, leaving behind a fire trail. His lips and hands explored her against her skin, as if they had memorized every say it, he demanded, his voice rough with every inch of her, as if branding himself into her very soul. Needs say you're mine? She should have fought it. She should have resisted, but instead she let go of everything that had ever held her back. I'm yours, she whispered, in a barely audible but powerful voice. Powerful enough to alter everything. His chest gave out a deep, contented growl. And then he took her whole, again drowning her as a passion so fierce, so overwhelming, that nothing else before the morning sun reached the windows mattered. Hours had passed. Damien lay suffocating as the tension between them had only intensified. Beside her, his body was still pressed down, his arm wrapped around her waist in possessiveness. Against hers, as if he couldn't bear the thought of losing her. Selena knew she had to say something to break the silence, but what could she possibly say? That she was scared, that she had no idea how to handle a man like Damien, that the way he looked at her as if he would burn the entire world to the ground just to keep her both terrified and thrilled her in ways she didn't understand. She exhaled softly, shifting slightly beneath the sheets. Instantly, Damon's grip tightened. Don't move, he murmured, his voice still heavy with sleep. Selena stiffened. Damien, I have to. You don't have to do anything except stay here with me. Her heart clenched. I have work. Damon's eyes opened slowly, his piercing blue gaze fixed on hers with a predatory ferocity that sent a chill down her spine. As you worked for me. He reminded her, a slow smirk, curving his lips, which means I decide. She tried to get away with a frown. As you work, but his grip was firm, and that's not how it works, as you know. And his smile gave way to something more sinister. Something perilous. You suppose I care about work right now? His voice was almost low. A growl after what we just talked about last night? Selena choked hard. Damien. She suddenly felt as though she had entered potentially dangerous territory. This can't change everything. His jaw tightened. Why the hell not? She hesitated, her fingers clutching the sheets. Because I don't know if I can handle you a slow, sweetheart. You don't have a wicked smile that tugged at the corner of his lips choice any longer. Her entire body tensed as his fingers slowly traced a path down her spine, as though reminding her that she belonged to him. Now Damon's voice dropped lower, his gaze making you believe that I will allow you to pretend that this never happened. Selena swallowed. I don't know how. He tightened his grip on her waist and brushed his lips against her ear, his breath hot against her skin. Then let me make it very clear for you, sweetheart. He pulled her closer, his lips hovering over hers. His voice a dangerous Selena whisper. You're mine now, and I won't let go of her pulse. Pounded violently, the weight of his words sinking deeply into her chest, and she immediately realized that there was no turning back due to the fact that Damon Harov had claimed her and would never allow her to. Go. Selena awoke to the warmth of Damon's body wrapped around her and his firm hold. Still possessive even in his sleep, the early morning light streamed through the large windows in his penthouse, let golden flecks through on the silk. That barely covered their tangled bodies. She slowly blinked, her heart beating, pounding on her ribs as the weight of the previous night sank deeply into her chest. The way he had touched her, kissed her, claimed her. Everything had been too intense, too consuming, as if Damon had been holding back from her for an excessive amount of time, and now that he had her, there was no escaping his grasp. Her skin was still burning with the way his name had fallen from her lips in a breathless state, the memory of his lips trailing over every part of her body sighs as he explains how his eyes had darkened with unbridled hunger each time she gave in to him. Despite the undeniable fervor that had blossomed between them, her inner voice warned her that this was dangerous. Damon was not your typical man. He was powerful, obsessed, excessive, and used to getting what he wanted at any cost, and at the moment, she was what he wanted. Selena slightly shifted in an effort to move, but as soon as she did, Damon grabbed her waist and pulled her in. Back against his exposed chest. Where do you think you're going? Her breath hitched. His lips brushing against the delicate skin of her shoulder, sending chills down her spine. He quickly flipped her over on her back, his piercing not working. His muscular arms encircled her, their blue eyes fixed on hers with a possessive intensity that took her breath away. Beneath him, he looked over her flushed skin as if he had memorized every detail. "Selena, you won't leave this bed," she said, hard swallowing her fingers. Damien's last night under her sheets was just the beginning of his. The dark voice was filled with a perilous certainty. "And if you think I'm going to let you go after what we talked about, then you have no idea who I am at all." "Damien," this made her feel uneasy, "is not a game," and his slow, deliberate smirk devastating. "Do I look like I'm playing?" He traced his fingers down the bending her waist and sending sparks through her already delicate skin. Sweetheart, I warned you that I don't act casually, and now that I have your attention." Lowered his voice to a low growl. "I'll never let you go." Selena's heart was pounding wildly and her breath was caught in her throat. Daman was passionate, but this was obsessive. His touch was more than just possessive. It was a silent promise that she was his and his alone. She turned her face away, trying to steady herself. "You don't own me." Damien laughed darkly in his chest. "I believe." So he wrapped his fingers around her chin and tipped her head back toward him. "Then tell me." His lips brushed against hers, teasing, tempting. "Why do you tremble every time I touch you?" And her pulse pounded, a sign that you're overwhelmingly. His smile widened. "But you can't stop me," she resented. Right. She didn't like how his touch made her addicted, but she couldn't stop it. Damien's gaze softened a little. Little, just enough to make her chest tighten. "Stop fighting this, Selena." "Stop fighting me?" She parted her lips, but she said nothing because she was already aware of the truth in her core. His, and despite her best efforts, she could not escape Damon Hargrove's obsession. The morning air was thick with tension, and they could still feel the weight of the night before, like Selena was lying in the silk sheets beneath an unspoken promise that neither could escape. Because Damon had repeatedly claimed her, her body was still sensitive, and she could still feel his ghost, touch the skin of her with his possessive hands, branding her as his. But she was aware that she couldn't remain trapped in his world as the moment's reality settled over her. In perpetuity, Damon Harrove posed a danger not only due to the raw, overwhelming passion in her, but because he was a man who never gave up on what he wanted, and right now, he wanted her. As she turned her head, her breath caught. He woke up, his intense blue eyes fixed on her as he lay next to her. With his arm around her waist, he signaled to her that he would not let her go. His expression was unreadable, but something sinister filled his eyes. "Obsessive. You're thinking about running, aren't you?" His voice sounded rough from sleep, but it remained so powerful. Selena swallowed hard, shifting slightly beneath the edge that made her pulse quicken. His hold, "Damien, you belong here." He cut her off, his grip tightening as he pulled her closer, his bare chest pressed against her back, the heat of his body searing into her skin with me. Her heart was always pounding at his words because of his unwavering certainty. She whispered it as she said it. But voice, "You can't just decide that for me." Because a part of her had always desired, she knew it was a lie. Damon sharply exhaled through his fingers in search of something more substantial, something that consumed him. "I don't think you can comprehend the slow, deliberate strokes trailing over her arm," he whispered to Selena, brushing his lips against her temple. "Temporary, I don't do. When I take something, I don't take it lightly. I keep it." She turned and met his gaze squarely. "If I don't want to be kept," his jaw suddenly tightened. He whispered, his hand slipping, as something perilous flickered in his eyes. You wouldn't have noticed his thumb to her neck rubbing against her racing pulse. "If you didn't want this as much as I did, you should have surrendered to me the way you did." Because she was certain that he was right, Selena let her breath hitch and kissed and touched. There was no way to deny that her body had been the source of every whispered moan. Responded to him, no pretending that she didn't crave the way he made her feel. Still, the intensity of his possessiveness sent a shiver through her. "Damien, this is too much." His eyes darkened, tightening his fingers just enough to make her feel the dominance in his touch. "Too much." His lips curled in sweetheart, a slow, perilous smile that I haven't even begun to demonstrate how far this goes before she can complain. He rolled, her beneath him. His deliberate slowness in pressing her into the mattress made her dizzy. His lips brushed against hers, teasing, testing her resolve. "Tell me you don't want this," he whispered, pressing his hot breath into her mouth. "You don't need me the way," she said. "I need you." But she couldn't say anything because she couldn't. It not when his hands were tracing slow, lazy patterns down her body, not when his. She felt as though she were the only thing in his world because of the intensity with which his eyes were burning into hers. I thought Selena gasped as he held her lips in with a contented growl in his chest. A kiss so deep, so consuming, that it left her breathless. And as she melted into him, as she let the overwhelming passion of Damon Hargroves consume her. Obsession, she was certain of one thing. She couldn't get away from him because was already his. His silence in the room was suffocating, thick with the weight of. Selena was lying in the soft sheets with feelings that neither of them could deny. Her mind was in disarray due to the way Demand had held her, but her body was still tingling from the intense night before. Touched her and possessed her in a way she had never experienced before. Known a man like him who claimed his kisses were more than just love. His touch was more than just affectionate. It was a vow, not just passionate. Guarantee that she was his. And now, as the golden morning light poured in, through the large windows illuminating the tangled mess they had become, she realized that Damon could not escape something chilling. Harrowed, she turned her head slightly, her breath catching as she met his gaze. He was awake and staring at her with those piercing blue eyes, which appeared to see right through her was a dark, unreadable quality about them. And there was also a hunger that was so raw, it made her skin, which was already very sensitive, tremble. As if he feared she would vanish if he let go, his arm was still around her waist and holding her close. He murmured, "Go. You're thinking about running again," his voice being husky and deep. From sleep, it wasn't a question, it was a statement. Selena swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the sheets beneath her. "I'm not running," she whispered, but even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Damon smirked, his grip tightening ever so slightly. "Liar," her stomach flipped at the "a tone of possessiveness," Damien told me. He interrupted, his voice low and controlled, but there was something dangerous beneath the surface after everything that's happened. "Do you? Sincerely, I believe you can simply walk away," she opened her mouth to argue. She tried to tell him that she wasn't a possession he could keep, but he rolled her over onto her back before she could say anything. Motioned his body pressing into hers, trapping her beneath him. Her breath hitched as she felt the heat radiating from him, the sheer dominance in the way he caged her. "And you belong to me now," he whispered, his fingers tracing the curve of her jaw. "And I don't let go of what's mine." Selena's heart pounded her body, betraying her as a shiver of. She was filled with anticipation. However, she whispered, knowing that it was, even as she said it. Futile. Damon chuckled, his lips brushing against hers, teasing, tempting. "Oh, sweetheart," he murmured. "I already have." His kiss was slow, deliberate, a silent declaration of his obsession. Selena fought back, attempting to preserve her independence. But as soon as his tongue touched hers, she was gone, and his hands moved all over her body igniting a fire that only he could quench, and she hated how much she craved his touch. And you can hear him murmuring against her lips, "Like your body responds to my touch." His hand moves down, tracing her waistline. "That's because you belong to me, Selena, in every way, shape, and form." Her pulse racing. "Damien, this is crazy." "No," he growled, his eyes darkening. Selena's breath caught as she saw the raw obsessiveness in his gaze, and she thought, "What's crazy is thinking I'll ever let you go." Was more than just a man in love. He was consumed, and there was no way to escape him. Now Selena lay beneath a silk sheet, her body still trembling from the overwhelming intensity of the night before. But her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She had surrendered to Damon once again, allowed him to take her claim, her possess her in ways she never imagined before, her chest rising as she stared at the ceiling, and her cold realization that she was not washed over her as she took in irregular breaths. Longer in control, Daman Hargrove owned her every touch, every whispered word, every heated moment between them was proof of that, and the terrifying part was, she didn't know if she wanted to escape. The morning light streamed through the massive windows, casting golden hues over the luxurious bedroom. She slowly turned her head, but the sun's warmth did not stop the chill from creeping up her spine. Breath-catching when she found him already awake, propped up on one elbow, watching her with those piercing blue. His eyes seemed to hold a dangerous promise. They were dark and impossible to read. With something that made her heart pound, there was no regret in his eyes, no. "You're overthinking only possessions of uncertainty." Daman murmured, his voice husky, rough from sleep, yet still dripping with authority. His fingers reached out, tracing the curve of her shoulder, down to the dip of her waist, igniting a fire that was still burning from the previous night. "As you should already know, sweetheart." He leaned in, his lips barely brushing against her ear. "I don't like it when you overthink." Selena swallowed hard, her pulse racing. "Damien," she hesitated, struggling to find the appropriate expression, "because this is dangerous." His lips parted in a smirk, but there was nothing amusing about it. "Dangerous," his voice was slow, measured, but she could hear the warning beneath it. "You're only realizing that." As she turned to face, she slightly pushed herself up while holding the sheets to her chest. "Him you don't just love, Damien?" You, despite the fact that her voice was barely audible, she was aware that he heard every word. His expression got darker, and he was on top of her, trapping in a flash. Her beneath him, Selena gasped, her back pressing into the mattress as he hovered over her. His presence was overwhelming and suffocating. His hands clung to her wrists, securing them above her head. Is that what scares her? She kneeled and parted her legs in a way that scared her. He murmured, his lips just inches from hers. "I want every part of you. That I want not only your body, but also your mind, your soul, and your entire." "Tell me, Selena," that he demanded his as his grip tightened and his breath heated against her skin. "What part of you do you think I don't already own?" Your voice is dangerously low. Her heart slammed against her ribcage in panic and desire to act. She should have fought this insane obsession, but instead she found herself pushing him away. Drowning in it. "You're insane," she whispered, her voice shaking. Damien laughed, but it wasn't funny. "You knew that as soon as you let me in." "Touch you." His lips hovered over her jaw, radiating heat directly through her. You were aware of that when you begged for last night, while moaning about my name." His teeth continued to graze the delicate skin on her neck, causing her to cough. "Hitch, you knew exactly what you were getting into." "Sweetheart." Selena squeezed her eyes shut, trying to control her feelings for Damien. But this can't go on. Stilled, and though she could not make out his face when she opened her eyes, his grip held. On her wrists remained firm, and you might think, "I'll let you go." His voice appeared calm, but there was something deadly in the way he spoke, something that made her stomach twist. Damien say it, his fingers curled around her chin, and made her look him in the eye and say, "You're mine." Selena hesitated, but the fire in she was rendered defenseless as his eyes scorched through her. And in that moment she realized the truth. She was already his. "Say it, Daman?" She exhaled tremblingly, her lips separating, and demanded once more his waning patience. "Yours," she whispered as soon as she finished speaking, and his lips collided with hers. Hers claiming her in a kiss that was so deep and all-consuming that it took over all of her thoughts. From her mind, his hands moved from her wrists, sliding down her arms, her waist. The force of his touch sent her spiraling, her body arching into his until there was nothing between them. There was no escaping Damien Harov, he reminded her precisely. He was not only obsessed with her, he was also addicted, and now she was too. Selena lay in Daman's arms, her body still burning from the unrelenting passion of the night before, but her mind was entangled in the whirlwind of her desire, fear, and surrender herself to him repeatedly, knowing that she was sinking each time, deeper into something she could no longer escape. Daman Harov wasn't just a man who grabbed what he wanted, he was a man who never let go, and she is lying there now. With her body hurting from the force of his touch, She realized how trapped she was. Truly was, the golden morning light streamed through the towering window of his penthouse, bathing the room in a warm glow, but it did nothing to ease the... She turned her head slightly as a chill began to creep up her spine, catching her breath. His piercing blue eyes were fixed on hers when she discovered him already awake and perched on one elbow. Full of something sinister and perilous, there was no hesitation in them, without a doubt, only the kind of unadulterated obsessive possession that gave her Titan. "You're overthinking things again. Your stomach tight," Daman murmured in a husky and laced voice. With glee, but with a warning in his voice, he touched her with his fingers and stroked her cheek before fading to the curve of her neck, making his touch light but unquestionably asserting that Selena swallowed, attempting to ignore how hard her heart was beating on his. She hesitated, not knowing how to touch Damien. "You're trying to convince yourself of this by saying the thoughts that are racing through her head. Isn't real," he smirked, tilting his head slightly, "that what happened between us was just a mistake." His touch calmed her nerves as his thumb traced the outline of her lips. "Fire, tell me, sweetheart, do mistakes make you moan the way you did last night?" Heat rushed to her face, but she refused to look away because this was out of the ordinary for her. Damon chuckled with his fingers as she tried to keep her voice steady and whispered, sliding down her arm before wrapping around her wrist. "Define normal," he said, bringing her hand up to his lips and kissing the palm's interior, with a gentleness that contrasted with his madness. "Eyes, because I don't act like Selena. I do what I want, and right now he's holding on to me. Tighten just a little." "I want you," gave her a shiver, but she forced herself to sit up, pulling the sheets around her. "Daman, this isn't just about what you want. I have a life outside of this." He moved faster than she expected, grabbing her waist and pulling her back down onto the bed beneath him. Trapping her once again, his body hovered over hers, his weight pressing her into the mattress, making it impossible to escape his fingers, slid beneath her chin, forcing her to look at him. "You think you still have a life outside of me?" His voice was perilously low, and his eyes were possessive, which made her, "Damien, you can't breathe," hitch, thinking I'll let you walk away from her beating heart. "Just as I could," he said, his lips barely touching hers. This isn't love. This is obsession." Damien's smirk was, and Selena's stomach was twisted. Slow, dark, and deadly, and he got closer, his warm breath against her skin. "Obsession signifies that I will never leave you. Means you won't have to worry about me disappearing. And it means that every inch of I own your every thought, breath, and heartbeat." His lips, her jawline causing her to tremble. "Tell me, is that really what scares you?" she asked, clenching her fists in an effort to. Despite her body's reaction to his words, she whispered, "You can't control me." With a chuckle, Damien moved his hand down her body, tracing each curve as if memorizing her. "Oh, sweetheart," he murmured, his lips trailing down her neck. I already hitched her breath as he slowly and deeply kissed her, erasing every. Despite her desire to deny it, she gave up all resistance she had left. There was no escaping Daman because she was already his. The expansive floor-to-ceiling windows of Daman Hargrove's penthouse casting let in the morning light. A Sea Ross's silk sheets tangled around Selena's delicate body in golden streaks. However, the storm that was raging within her that night could not be subdued by warmth. Endless, with Daman's unyielding touch and his husky deep voice against her skin, his lips branding her with kisses that made her tremble, his hands roaming over every inch of her as if he was imprinting himself onto her soul. She was breathless, exhausted, and however, the moment she moved, she felt the weight of his presence, which was unquestionable evidence of his possession. Damien was awake, his body half draped over hers, his arm locked around her waist, signaling inaudibly that she was not permitted to leave for even a moment. She gulped hard. She carefully turned her head to look at him, trying to stop the erratic heartbeat. There he was, watching her, his piercing blue eyes darker than the midnight sky, locked on too, hers with an intensity that made her stomach twist. There was something unreadable in his gaze, something Daman was not obsessive desire possession, which was both dangerously quiet and impossible to ignore. Just looking at her, he was consuming her. Selena's breath hitched as his fingers traced sluggish circles on her hip with a light but commanding touch. "You're awake," he murmured, his sleepy, rough voice sending an uncontrollable shiver down her spine. His lips slightly curled, but he didn't look amused, and his grip on her waist tightened due to overthinking, bringing her closer to him. Even though she had not moved, the heat of his body pressed against her, as if he could feel her trying to escape against hers, making it impossible to ignore his eyes' persistent hunger and the way his fingers played with the sheets, as if he were debating whether or not to remove them all and sweep her up. Again, Selena made it a point to take a deep breath, to concentrate on something other than the suffocating awareness between them. Damien, she hesitated, knowing that any word, any wrong move could set him off this, whatever this is between us. He slightly clenched his jaw because it was too much, but he smiled slowly, and dangerous too much. His voice was a whisper of amusement, but his grip on her didn't loosen. Instead, his fingers slid lower, tracing the curve of her thigh with irritating sluggishness, her body betraying her with an abrupt intake of breath. "Tell me, sweetheart, is it really too much?" His lips brushed against her ear, his breath hot, his touch a silent promise of ruin. "Or are you just scared because you know you'll never be able to get away from me?" Selena's heart slammed into her. She tried to push him away, but he wouldn't move. His strength was effortless. His control was complete. "You can't just do what I can," he said softly, his hands on her chin. And raising her face to meet his, she will darken his eyes and lose her smile. "Into something far more perilous. You think I'll ever let you go after last night?" He pressed his lips together and leaned in closer. "You belong to me now." Selena's were ghosting over her, teasing and torturing her until she was shaking. Her mind was screaming for her to resist, but her body had already given in, Damien whispered. In a barely audible chuckle, he slid a dark hand down her body, claiming every inch of her as if to demonstrate a point. "Say it." He murmured, his lips pressing against the sensitive skin of "Say you're mine," she said, her neck sending fire through her veins. She swallowed hard, determined. Slipping Daman, this isn't his patience, snapped in the blink of an eye. He rolled on top of her, trapping her beneath him, his weight pressing her into the mattress, his eyes burning with something primal. "Say it." He growled, his voice low, demanding, unforgiving. Selena shuddered, her hands gripping the sheets, torn between fear and desire. His fingers slid into her hair as she turned her head back, his lips just inches from hers. "Say it," he whispered, his tone both a plea and a command, and in that moment she broken. "I'm yours," she whispered, her voice shaking as she refused to name the second. The words left her mouth. Damon claimed her. His lips crashed against hers, roar, and desperate, his hands roaming over her body with a need. He kissed her, as if he were attempting to merge her soul with his, as if he was making sure she would never forget, never even think about another man. He wanted to own her completely and irrevocably. She gasped as he deepened the kiss, his hands gripping her thighs, pulling her beneath him, his body pressing into hers in a way that left no doubt about what he wanted there. He murmured, there was no hesitation in him, doubtless only pure, unrelenting hunger. "Mine." Against her lips, his voice rough, possessive, "Only mine." Selena could barely breathe as Daman engulfed her once more. And the terrifying part was that she allowed him because she knew the truth. She was already his, and there was no escaping Damon Harab. The night was thick with silence, the kind that clung to the air like an impending storm wrapping around Selena as she lay. Her skin was still intact in Damon's bed, her heart beating steadily and painfully against her ribs. The way he had touched her made her feel tingly, and she thought he had eaten her whole. With an obsession that frightened and seduced her all at once, the weight of his arm was draped possessively across. His fingers were splayed against her stomach, holding her in place even while she was sleeping, as if he feared that he would lose her at any moment. If he let go of her, she would vanish into the night beyond the penthouse walls. She stared at the ceiling, her mind a tangled mess of emotions: want, fear, helplessness, and something more fundamental, that she rejected to name the Damon she had once known, the cold, arrogant CEO who had ruled his world with unshakable control, was gone. In his place was a man driven to madness simply by thinking about her, a man who had gone beyond lust into something much more perilous, something that encircled her like a chain. Couldn't break, he had told her over and over in whispered words and bruising kisses, in the way he clung to her. As he took her, showed that she was his. And the terrifying reality is that she did. But how could she continue to allow this to happen? Could she continue to give in to a man who had no boundaries, no limits, and would rather destroy the world than let her go? Go, the thought sent a shiver through her, and that slight night movement was enough to wake him before she could even take another breath. Damien shifted, his body pressing against hers from behind. A low rumble came from his grip, which tightened like a predator catching its prey. From his throat, a mix of annoyance and something more sinister. Territorial. "You're awake," he murmured, his voice still sharp despite being thick with sleep. As if he were aware of her every breath, even in his dreams, as his lips brushed against her bare shoulder. His warm breath sent her shivering. "Why aren't you sleeping, sweetheart?" His slow, sluggish movements against her stomach were deceiving. Kindness that made her stomach feel uneasy. She swallowed hard in an effort to steady her voice. "I was just thinking of the tension in Damien's body. Hers." And then he quickly pinned her there by turning her on her back. Beneath him, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that sent her straight through, with a blast of heat about his dangerously loud voice. As if trying to read, his soft fingers traced her skin as they moved up her arm. Her every thought, Selena forced herself to breathe, to ignore the way her body reacted to his betrayal of her, even though her mind yelled for her to keep her distance from us. She whispered something about it, and Damon's jaw clenched, but his lips were open, curled into a smirk, slow and dark, the kind that made her stomach knot with something dangerously close to addiction. This he murmured, dipping his head down to brush his lips against hers. Featherlight, but devastating, is inevitable. She gasped as he intensified the kiss by sliding his hand down her body and claiming to possess. She took Damien and whispered to him while pressing her fingers into his. She tried to push him away with her shoulders, but he didn't move and didn't let go of his grip for a second. Tightened his grip, his teeth grazing her skin and his lips trailing down her neck, pressing down on her racing heart. As if he were marking her all over again, he murmured against her throat. The throat, his voice a husky rasp that contributed to her trembling. "But thinking won't change anything, because you are mine, Selena, and you have always been mine." His fingers tilted her, chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze, and what she saw there made her breath catch possession. Madness is a constant, unquenchable hunger, as they say. Selena trembled as he whispered, "You belong to me." She was torn between the war in her mind and the undeniable reality of her body. Damien tightened his grip on her, his eyes burning into hers. "Say it." He commanded, his voice low, demanding lethal in its quiet intensity, and in that moment she broke all over. She whispered, "Again, I belong to you." And with a low growl, Damon lost control as soon as she said the words, crushed his lips against hers, kissing her so deeply that it took her breath away, and held her in his hands with a desperation that bordered on insanity. She felt him everywhere, his lips, his touch. His body was pressing her into the mattress, devouring her, entrapping her in ways she couldn't escape. He did more than that. He needed her surrender, and as she lay below him, submerged in his madness, she realized the most terrifying truth of all. She wasn't sure she ever wanted to escape, because Damien Harrove had already destroyed her, and she loved every second of it. The golden hues of dawn spilled through the towering glass windows of Damon Hargrove's penthouse, bathing the room in a soft glow that felt almost ethereal, as if the world itself had conspired to create the perfect moment, a moment where love, obsession, and desire intertwined. So Selena moved beneath them so deeply that it was impossible to tell them apart. Her weak, trembling body continued from the previous night. The silk sheets Night Damon had claimed her with his body and shattered every barrier that stood in their way. He had kissed her with something far more profound, a hunger that had vanished, As he traced every square inch of her skin with his finger, her breath whispered her name like a prayer. Reverence held her so tightly that she could feel the frantic beating of his heart against her own. And now when she finally opened her eyes, she discovered that she was right where she belonged, wrapped in his embrace. Her body pressed against his arm possessively draped over her waist, his fingers curled around her hip, as if even in sleep he refused to let her go. He had spent the entire night proving to her over and over that she was his, that she would always be his. And she turned her head to face the terrifying yet beautiful truth. She wanted to be. Slightly her gaze landing on Damon's face, his usually sharp, arrogant features. His dark scruff along his jaw, softened by sleep, made him appear both dangerous and utterly irresistible. He appeared serene even in slumber. There was an intensity to him as if his entire being was tethered to her, as if his heart clenched at the thought of losing her would destroy him. Thought an overwhelming wave of emotions crashing over her. What had started as an obsession, a dangerous game of control and surrender, had transformed into something significantly more substantial, which neither of them could deny anymore. Damien Harrow, the man whose once unshakable arrogance had ruled his world, who had never been content with anything other than fleeting desire, had not only had he fallen, but he had fallen so deeply and irreversibly into love that there was no way out. For either of them, she reached out hesitantly, her fingers tracing the strong lines of his face, the warmth of his skin sending a familiar shiver through her. And then slowly, as if sensing her touch, he opened his eyes. Softened the piercing blue eyes which were always filled with dominance and intensity. His smile curled in a slow, almost lazy grin when they first met. "Lips, sweetheart, you're staring," he murmured, his voice husky from sleep. Selena blushed without looking, sending warmth coursing through her veins. "A way maybe I like looking at you," she admitted softly, and for the first time Damon gave off a look of almost total shock, as if he had anticipated her to back away to fight. Him to deny the truth that had been growing between them all this time. But she didn't. She simply gazed at him, her heart laid bare in the quiet morning light, and then something shifted in his eyes that caused her breath to catch something sour and unguarded. Love, Damon swiftly flipped her onto her back without warning. Motion his body caging hers beneath him, his hands framing her face as if she were the most precious thing he had ever touched. "Repeat it," he demanded in his rough, almost desperate voice. Selena swallowed hard as if she were staring at me. Her fingers brushed his arms over his, shoulders dredging him in closer. "I do," she whispered. "I like looking at you. Being with you, she hesitated, her heart pounding. But she was brave enough to say because of the way Damon was looking at her and the way his fingers slightly trembled against her skin. One thing she had been too afraid to admit. "I love you." Damien's entire body stopped moving, and the breath he was about to take never came. The world seemed to stop, as if time itself had paused to witness the moment that would alter everything. And he moved before she could blink. Damon's eyes. Lips collided violently with hers, unrelentingly pouring out every drop of his soul into the kiss. It wasn't just passion, it wasn't just desire, it was love roar, and devouring a love that was so strong that it made her shake, and he kissed her in his arms, as if he had been starving for this confession, as if he had been, waiting for her to finally say the words that had already been carved into his heart. Say it. His entire body was entangled in her hair, as he once again growled at her lips. Selena G. Aced felt his body pressing into hers, as if he wanted to unite them. She whispered, "I love you," as he slid his hands down her body and began a more passionate kiss. Against his lips, and the second the words left her mouth, Damon lost himself. He kissed her as if he had just won his most difficult battle, his grip tightening as he pulled her so far away from him. Close as if he could never get enough, as if he would spend the rest of his life proving to her just how much she meant to him. And she granted him permission because she was his. She had always been his, and as Damon pulled back his forehead, resting against hers, his breathing ragged, his eyes burning with something more intense than she had ever seen, he whispered the words that sealed their fate forever. "I love you, Selena, and I will never let you go." Tears pricked at her eyes, but they weren't from sad. They were from the sheer depth of what they had become, of what they would always be because, despite the craziness, possessiveness, and madness, the overwhelming, all-consuming passion Damanharov had for her, him just as madly as the sun rose, bathing them in its golden glow. She knew one thing was certain: this would last forever.